Um, I think we can kind of take our our journey from week two, and I will. I'm going to talk a little bit about cortisol and its effect on the brain here in just a second when we move into week three. But we talked a little bit about brain chemistry and the effects that the chemicals can have on your brain, especially stress. I thought there's some good stress and bad stress, but I got a story for you, so hold on a second. Um, week three. Week three is predominantly about environments. Environments in which the learning happens, and environments in which the teacher builds a relationship with the students. A relationship where the students are supposed to feel safe, because if they don't feel safe, that gets in the way of the higher order thinking skills. And we talked a little bit about how cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine, the adrenal cortex chemicals that start to stimulate the fight or flight reflex shuts down all of the higher order thinking, all of the access to the prefrontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex. Of course, kids under the age of 19 really don't even have a prefrontal cortex, even at that point. The medial lobe, the thinking and memory centers for everyday computation and learning, gone. If there's no safety, then there's no learning. I think there was where it addresses Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that safety is one of the big ones. It is like one of the big components, and if you don't have that, then you can forget everything else. It's kind of like watching on a different sort of, not necessarily environmentally related, but kids that are going through tough times, like at home. Kids that have had their homes vandalized or burglarized. Oh, they're a wreck. They're useless at school. Kids that have been through divorces. I watched my own daughter go through this, and watching her sort of struggle with the divorce and how she's a brain. The kid's got a walking computer and can't seem to pull her act together enough to just get things in. And I can understand that. And we'll talk a little bit more about the cortisol and the emotional impact to learning here in just a second. A little story about rooms. This is personal confession time. Is a 20-year veteran in the classroom. I have pushed some limits, and in the process of, and without getting into a huge amount of detail, I was asked to participate in something at the beginning of the school year for the high school, and I thought, hey, I'm going to take this up a notch. And so they have this James Bond themed entrance for the principal, and I thought, okay, well, I'll jump in here and I'll help out. So I thought, I'll make smoke flares. Don't get ahead of me on this, okay? Because I know you're like filling in the blanks here. But I was behind schedule. I still had media to make for this dumb thing, and so I saw one of my AP Chem kids. I'm like, hey, so come on over. We'll do this. And of course, I've seen this kid do this 1,000 times. He's a veteran of this, but we didn't have all of the right parts, so we had to jimmy rig some things, and unfortunately, didn't turn out so well. The reaction ignited in the classroom, and a pillar of flame and plasma launched straight up through the ceiling and set off the fire alarm. Now, the fire alarm then, because of the heat, triggered the sprinklers, which then proceeded to dump about 10,000 gallons of water on the upstairs of the science building, which then went down the stairs to the downstairs of the science building, and all of this the day before school opened. Yeah. So, needless to say, I wasn't exactly everybody's favorite coworker. I was getting a lot of hate mail, and I tried as best I could to try to make up for it, to try to help out with things and accommodate folks. But woo, the stress going on at that time. I mean, that was right when the and we'll just talk about stress and apply this in terms of the class itself. But that's when the family stuff that I was going through really hit the ceiling. And so I had the work thing, and I didn't know if I was going to even have a job after that. And then the whole splitting up with my wife, who was my prom date in high school, had been with for 23 years. Normally, I have a little memory trick, and I memorize all the kids' names, all of them, in the class at the same time. And I memorize everybody, and it's really normally no problem at all. I could not remember anything. I would try to remember stuff and I couldn't. I struggled. And for the first time in maybe 10 years, I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. I could not force my brain to stay awake that long to pay attention. Drink of Champions. It was phenomenal. I've never seen my own brain shut off like that, and it's because of the cortisol. Now, I could get 2 hours of sleep a night because I was just stressed and I couldn't sleep. 2 hours, no problem. I was wide awake the next day. But this can only go on for so long. And then the cortisol's presence inside your brain has this really negative effect on the hippocampus and starts to inhibit the learning and the memory process, so where you just start forgetting things altogether. It's a tough gig. So, next time you start to see kids and they're not performing, they're not learning in their classroom, it is very possible that they have something horrendous going on. And being able to address the emotional states of the kids is enormously important. One, to stabilize the emotional state, to create the trust bond with the teacher, and three, to alleviate the cortisol levels, because they're going to destroy everything. I mean, my daughter's a perfect example of that. Now, attached to that story, my room, and I'm hoping that I can get the pictures, and they're on the course guidance, to get those pictures of what my room looked like before and after this whole thing. I used to have one of the best looking rooms in the school, and afterward it looked like, probably New Orleans after, Hurricane Katrina. It was horrible. And, it stayed that way for weeks. And the kids would come in, and I came in, and I hated being in there. I could feel it. So one day, I don't know where I got the energy to do it. I got a couple of kids, stayed afterward, and cleaned the place up a little bit. The following Monday, just walking in there changed my whole attitude about that room. And it made me feel so much better. And even the kids, when they walked in, they immediately commented on how clean everything was and how good everything looked. And I really didn't do that much except just clean the counters and organize some things. And they noticed immediately. And I asked them, I said, do you think this makes a difference in your willingness to want to be in the room? They said, yeah, absolutely it did. So I know that elementary school teachers, they tend to pay a little bit more attention to what their room looks like. High school teachers, not so much. I have a teacher across the hall. Her room is blank. Quite literally, if you walked in there after she left, you'd think no one taught in there at all. It's crazy. So it is very important to consider the environment when you're teaching, and the lighting is part of that. You don't want it too bright. You don't want it too dark, because that, especially with high school kids, that put them right out. But something that they don't have to strain their eyes, and it's in natural sunlight and daylight is the best. And sometimes you want to try, if at all possible, to stay away from those the tube lights, because they emit an ultra low frequency sound that a lot of kids can actually hear, and if they don't hear it overtly, they hear it almost subconsciously, and it's really grating. And I watch them really struggle with that. Lastly, we talk about the nature of memory, and I have a little story about that. Most of the time, when you're teaching things in school, they don't have much of a significant impact. They're kind of meaningless. And coincidentally, kind of like what you had for breakfast this morning, it had no significant threat. There's no issue with it and nothing. So you forgot it. Your brain ignores stuff that doesn't threaten it. There's three basic things that your brain pays attention to. One, is this thing that I'm witnessing, can I eat it? Will it kill me? Can I have sex with it? So fundamentally, there are three things that your brain puts on high priority. And if any one of those happens to come into play, then all of a sudden there's a whole subsystem inside the limbic area of your brain, which is in the center middle, kicks in, and all of the thinking processes, gone on. Which is, in that last one there is part of the reason why I think it would not be such a bad idea to have separated classrooms, especially in some of the high schools I've been in. So here's a story. Now, I teach chemistry. It is probably the most unloved subject there is. Maybe algebra clocks in as maybe worse than this, but most people hate chemistry. So trying to teach it's hard. Well, every Valentine's Day I teach this thing called the chemistry of love, and I go through and I talk about the different chemicals that are responsible, the neurotransmitters that are responsible for the feelings associated with romantic love. And I go to great extent to point out that all of these chemicals can be stimulated using certain culturally programmed and biologically responsive subsystems in your brain that are designed to make this process happen. We find it, and if you ask our market-driven economy, the pinnacle of our entire experience would be to experience romantic love, which is a big, giant, fat lie. And I try to explain this to them. Now, the women, they usually come out of this very disappointed because all of this romance and this romantic love thing, which makes them feel good. And I tell them, just because you know the biomechanism behind it does not make it feel any different. Although when your heart's broken, at least you know that it's chemistry, and at some point it's going to reach an equilibrium, and it does go away. The pain, it goes away, but it doesn't make it hurt any less, and that's tough. So, there's a kid who I had in 8th grade, and God love him. I hope he marries well, but he's not functioning on all cylinders. A couple tacos, short of a combo platter. But just the neatest kid and wants to try really hard. And he's been in a couple of my classes and he never did well. He big, hardcore ADHD, and I don't know why he didn't qualify for special services because school's not his thing. I mean, that environment, it's not his thing. But he was TAing for me once, and he came into the classroom, and it was Valentine's Day, and I had this presentation up. And he came in and he sat down, and he looked over and he goes, "Hey, this is the Valentine's Day presentation that you gave back in 8th grade." That was 3 years prior to that. And this kid who doesn't remember anything in school remembered that. He said because he was disappointed because he had a crush on some girl when he was in 8th grade, and this made it feel like it wasn't real. So he remembered it. I'm gonna share something here as I end up. The more emotion you can tag to a specific subject matter, the faster it's going to be learned. It's just how your brain works. Everything that has an emotional impact is immediately biochemically stored for long-term memory. You make it boring, it's going to be disappeared. Unless you repeat it. Then, of course, you can force it into the long-term memory. But if you want it to go there quickly, it has to be emotionally driven. I don't know how you do that with just everything. Sometimes you can do it because the students have a connection with the teacher, and sometimes that helps. But by and large, emotion is what drives immediate long-term memory. So that'll give you a few things to think about as we go into this week. I'm looking forward to see where the fireworks of displaying and posts go this week. And if you have any additional questions, just pop a little message in there in the ask your instructor thing. Or you can email me, or you can sign language, or you can make a video. You can do that too. So anyway, we will be in touch soon. So if you need anything, holla.